Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 3 of our reading of Guinevere by Sharan Newman. Um, First, though, as always, we are going to go over the copyright information, and I will say that this book is still for sale, where most books are sold. Most of the big outlets should still have this book. The sequel, which is the Chessboard Queen, and the third book of the trilogy called Guinevere Evermore. But first of all, we are going to go over the copyright information. It's copyright 1981 by Sharan Newman, and I have written permission to read this book on my YouTube channel. Any inquiries on that, you can email me and I can show you proof. Anyways, this is a large print version of the book. And in the last episode, we met. Let's see. Guinevere was lost in the woods, as happened in the first part, and then we met Giraldus, who is a saint. Apparently, he hears voices, and we are finding out a bunch about him. We also found out that there is a mysterious table in the wine cellar that appears to be, I don't know, dark or evil or something. Anyways, really fascinating. Anyways, we were finding out more about Giraldus, and we're going to continue with that. Another thing was that Flora, the nurse, was really fascinated by the weird silver hair that Guinevere found in the woods. It made her younger or something. I don't know. Anyways, let's see. I'm trying to remember where we were. Okay. Slowly, he began to recognize the different voices and picked up new tunes instantly, while others grumbled on in the same old monotone. No matter what he played, he grew comfortable with them, though his opinion of their ability grew less. Some days they would all sing together charmingly; on others, the cacophony would be unbearable. There was sorry about that. Oh, yeah. The cacophony would be unbearable. There was one pure alto with a slight vibrato who constantly followed his playing beautifully. Giraldus fell half in love with it. Finally, it occurred to him that these were probably not the voices of angels. He concluded that a celestial choir would simply have more good voices. There wasn't one tenor who could sing on tune, and the sopranos were positively shrill. Even his alto was a little too sultry for true piety. His attempts to explain this to his family and friends were brushed off as attacks of modesty. They had decided that there was a saint in their midst, and they would settle for nothing less. He became more involved with the voices than with the people who he could see. He spent more and more time with them, or at least paying attention to them. They were always with him. As they showed signs of improvement, he started coaching them out loud, playing to them, practicing scales, until his family wondered if having a saint among them was really such an honor. The question was finally resolved one night at dinner. Several guests had been invited from the surrounding estates. They were all old friends who were content to overlook Giraldus's new status. The meal was a good one, and the wines were old and strong. Everyone was enjoying himself immensely when Giraldus suddenly stood up, pointed his finger at something across the room. He glared into space, seemingly at nothing, and shouted fiercely, "If all of you don't stop screeching and groaning in my ears, you can go back to wherever you came from." He then upset his wine glass and finger bowl with a sweeping gesture and stormed out. Naturally, the guests thought he meant them. There was some confusion, as a few accused their neighbors of being the source of the noise. Fights were breaking out at the lower tables. By the time Giraldus's parents had managed to calm down those at the main one, it took quite some time before everyone returned to their meal, and a new cask of wine had been opened to soothe the hurt feelings. The next day, Giraldus's parents decided that it might be best for everyone if their dear and holy son went to a place more suited to his nature, a monastery perhaps, or some other retreat far, far from sinful man. They told him at once, as kindly as they could, but Giraldus was listening to an alto solo and heard only a fraction of what they said. His face was dreamy and peaceful, and it gave the mother a moment's sorrow to have to give him up to God. But she was a devout woman and assumed that God would see that he ate properly, dressed warmly, and didn't overtax himself, and it would be nice to be able to entertain again. So a few days later, Giraldus set off on foot down the mountain. He was supposed to strike out towards the west to an Irish monastery on the coast, but he soon discovered that he could survive quite well on his own. His fame had spread through the mountains, and he was greeted enthusiastically whenever he appeared. He sang well, didn't steal, and left a blessing on each house he stayed at. The reverence of his hosts was occasionally tiresome, but the food and lodgings were usually good, and he enjoyed the society of different people. After 18 years in the company of sunrises and sheep, human companionship can be very interesting. At one stop he was given his horse, a creature of a philosophical nature whom he named Plotinus. Plotinus apparently didn't mind music as he plodded along, and they got along well. Giraldus was always glad to rest a while with Leodegrance and Gwynlyn. The food was excellent, the wine superb, and the conversation interesting. Best of all, they respected him without placing too much emphasis on his supposedly saintly attributes. They asked a blessing on arrival and departure, and nothing more. He liked them. When he had washed and put on the new soft robe that was left for him, Giraldus joined the family at dinner. He fervently hoped that the maids who had brought him the bath had not stayed to watch him from behind the curtains. He had thought he felt a draught, and more than once he had discovered a maid or even a fosterling outside his chambers, curious to discover if saints were made of the same as other men. Leodegrance wanted serious news, however, and Giraldus's concern over his privacy faded as he found himself flooded with questions. "Yes, sir," he repeated several between bites. "This young King Arthur is supposedly doing marvelous deeds against the Saxons, and it's doubtful that we'll have to worry about them coming this far again, at least while he is in command of the army. We have heard such fantastic stories of him," Gwynlyn complained. "If we believed them all, we would be sure that he was a giant with flaming hair, a magic lance in one hand, and an invincible sword in the other. He must not feel the need of a shield, or does he carry it in his teeth? He does indeed have a fine sword, Excalibur he names it," Giraldus answered, "and there are many tales of him finding it. All agree it is beyond the skill of modern man to forge such a blade. As for the other tales, I don't know. They say he once went into battle carrying a cross on his shoulder, but that is hard for me to imagine. A man has enough to weigh him down when he fights without adding a cross as well." "Perhaps it's a metaphor," Gwynlyn suggested. Perhaps it's all nonsense made up to fool the ignorant the ignorant louts who like that sort of thing," Leodegrance snorted. "We've heard about his battles, how he slew this and that ridiculous number alone and saved the day. Assuredly, we've had no Saxon incursion near here, and it's the first year in many a long summers that we haven't. But I want to know who this boy is, this lad who says he's a king of all Britain. Not that it's much of a title now, with Saxons eating away at one coast and Irish raiding the other. Do you know who he is, where he comes from? I've heard it said that he was nurtured at the northern estate of Ector, a fine man who is oddly self-effacing. But as to his parentage, I know nothing, only that there is some mystery about it, and that it is somehow tied in with the prophecy of Master Merlin, made so many years ago. I was not born then, and do not know the correct words for all the prophecies. Merlin was half out of his head when he spouted all that, Gwendolen began. Merlin was second cousin to her, and she thought his dabbling in wizardry did not reflect well on the family. The poor lad had been dragged from his home, slandered as a devil's spawn, and threatened with horrible death. Anyone who babbled under those circumstances. Anyone would babble under those circumstances. Leodegrance interrupted her. I'm sure you know that shortly after that episode, all Merlin's family were killed in a sudden raid on their home. The horror of it unhinged his mind, and he totally lost his reason. Indeed, he disappeared for months afterwards. We try to be very gentle with him regarding those times, and never refer to them if we can avoid it. Geraldus was unconvinced. He was familiar enough with the story to know that Merlin had been spared because he had been able to solve King Vortigern's problem through his second sight. Geraldus had also encountered Merlin many times in his travels and had been deeply impressed with him. There was no sign of a weak mind that he could detect in this house. However, he was a guest, and he kept his thoughts to himself. I almost forgot, he announced, until we spoke of him. Your magnificent dinner and delightful wine had pushed Master Merlin from my thoughts, and also my reason for arriving here now. I am here at the bidding of Merlin to inform you that he will soon be traveling this way, perhaps at the end of the month. He hopes that you would have a place for him for a few weeks. He wanted me to warn you that he might be accompanied. Gwendolen smiled graciously, mentally already assigning rooms and wondering which of the stock should be slaughtered. I'm always happy to see my dear cousin, she said, adding wistfully. So many of our people are gone now, either killed in the raids or fled over the sea. It's good for one to have family about. Guinevere heard this at her end of the table, where she sat almost in darkness. She was not so thrilled that Merlin was coming. He had rarely spoken to her in the past, and then had glared at her so fiercely that she was half afraid of him. He always made her feel as if she had done something terribly wrong. She tended, therefore, to be silent and evasive with him. Now, thinking of him, she withdrew from the conversation around her. As her attention wandered, she noticed something odd about the people in the dining hall. There seemed to be too many of them, and there were people she had never seen before. They flitted among the guests, now sitting, now standing, and she couldn't focus on them clearly. As she tried to stare at one, the person would melt away and another would appear just out of her range. She tried to see them clearly for several minutes with no success. Then, just as she had given up and returned to her meal, she noticed a laughing woman with long black hair sitting directly across the room from her. Guinevere stared fixedly at her, but the woman didn't fade. She smiled directly at her. She was seated next to one of the local small landowners. Podius had happened to be in the neighborhood that day and had been invited to dinner. Such luck didn't often come his way, and he was doing his best to stuff himself with fresh meat and fine wine. He never glanced at the woman, even though she was almost touching his elbow. As he lifted his cup, she gently tipped it towards her own mouth. His meat was whisked from his plate, even as he was reaching for another piece of bread. The woman really had no manners at all, thought Guinevere, but the expression on Podius's face was so startled that she couldn't help laughing out loud. My lady, the page behind her spoke softly. Is there anything you desire? Guinevere glanced up at him. She smiled politely. No, I'm quite content. When she turned back, the woman had gone. Old Podius was holding his cup before him possessively, peering right and left in an effort to find the one playing tricks on him. Guinevere realized with a start that he had not been able to see the woman. Why not? She wondered. The woman had been right beside him. She looked around the table, noticing that her parents and Geraldus were still conversing politely. Every few seconds he would get a distant look and brush his hand across his hair or against his ear as if trying to shoo a fly. Guinevere stared intently, not at him, but at the space just over his shoulder. Slowly the woman materialized. She saw Guinevere's puzzled stare and winked. Guinevere returned to her dinner, blushing, and did not look up again. The end of the meal was so long in coming that she found herself getting sleepy. Their dear old butler and wine steward, Pincerna, had evidently decided that she was old enough to be served all she liked, or perhaps he had just forgotten to give the order to mix her wine liberally with water. At any rate, while the conversation had sparkled, and the strange people had fluttered around, Guinevere had listened and laughed. Now that everyone was murmuring and the music had started, she realized vaguely that the wine was slowly rising and her head was slowly falling. Flora found her some time later sound asleep with her head on the table. "Where is the pretty woman with the black hair?" she murmured, as Flora gathered her up to carry her to bed. "There was no woman there tonight," that you didn't. Oh, there was no woman here tonight that you didn't know, child," Flora answered. She was puffing a bit and put Guinevere down. "You must walk the rest of the way. I'm too old, and you've grown too much for me to do that any more." "Yes, Flora," Guinevere answered groggily, "but there was someone else here. She drank Podius's wine." How silly he looked, staring at an empty cup. I wonder if he thought he had drunk it himself and forgot it. "You've had too much wine yourself, young lady," Flora replied tartly, "and I'm putting you to bed." Guinevere sank back to sleep, hardly noticing that Flora had helped her out of her clothes. Her arms were limp, and as the night shift went on, Flora's eyes were bright. She didn't seem to be paying attention to the child. She muttered all the while. She smoothed covers and folded robes, but Guinevere was too deeply asleep to hear. "Another sign," the old woman grieved. "Another sign. She grows a space, and I cannot stop or change it. Soon, no doubt of it. Perhaps even by the winter fires. How can I bear it?" She cried out and touched the golden hair reverently. She tried to calm herself from the shock of this new knowledge and old grief. If they didn't demand the best, they would not be gods, and our gifts would have no meaning. With this remark, she carefully tucked the blanket about Guinevere and went to her own room, there to sit up all night staring out her window at the chapel. But what she saw in the darkness was impossible to tell. Geraldus stayed on as the summer waxed. He was welcomed by all, Guinevere especially. He didn't mind being trailed after by a half-grown girl. He was young and laughing and told exciting stories. She adored him, and they were together most of every day. Often Geraldus would play his pipes. Their willowy minor key would always give Guinevere an eerie feeling, as if she were someone else, and crying or laughing with them. It was most often at these times that she saw the people around the young saint. They were both men and women, all young and comely, as far as she could tell. Most of them appeared only as through a mist, and their hair and clothes never stayed still, even on the calmest days. She still had the problem that whenever she tried to look at them closely, they would fade and then appear again, just at the corner of her vision. Although she had realized almost immediately that they were Geraldus's singers, she told no one of her discovery. They didn't appear at all the way she had been told angels would. She felt no religious awe around them, only curiosity and some irritation. They puzzled her, but she was not a questioning child, and so she came to take them for granted as part of being with Geraldus. Gwendolyn was glad to have Guinevere roaming about with Geraldus, safe but out of the way. A visit from Merlin was something that must be prepared for. He was not only Gwendolyn's cousin, but a prophet of great renown, advisor to the late unlamented King Uther Pendragon, and also advisor to the new King Arthur, about whom there were so many tales and so few hard facts, so the household was turned inside out. Linen was aired, all the walls received a new coat of whitewash, and some were painted over in pastels. Gwendolyn sighed for a new mural, but those days were gone. There hadn't been an artist of any worth on the island in years. She also worried about the missing pieces in the mosaic on the floors of the main hall and the chapel. The tiny pieces of stone and glass had been imported from the Mediterranean. The few ships that braved the sea these days brought nothing that had such clear, shining stones. "My love, we can't have everything," Leodegrance remonstrated. When she complained, "Those ships that arrive here despite the ravages of the Northmen should be treasured for what they do bring. We have good wine, and spices, and you and Guinevere dressed in the sheerest of linens and silks. Must you also have artists and potters from Rome and Constantinople? Perhaps you would like a company of Greek players to entertain our guests." Gwendolyn laughed. "We will have them again some day. The Saxons shall not prevail. We will see our daughter married in cloth of gold with the finest entertainment Rome can offer. Poets, actors, dancers of all kinds." Leodegrance smiled, but he knew in his heart that all their fine talk was just bravado. Even Rome wasn't Rome anymore. The government had moved east, and the Caesars of the west were only puppets, set up and knocked down, almost with each change in the wind. Whatever art or literature or music was to be had would be homegrown. They already produced all the necessities of life and could survive, but the luxuries were good to have too, and they were getting even scarcer. "I am reminded," he said, "the pipes leading to the guest rooms are not in the best repair. I am sure that one is leaking. I must send for the smith to patch it before it is needed in the fall. Another thing," he thought, as he continued his inspection, "that we are unable to do as well as our forefathers. Perhaps our age of iron is disintegrating into something even worse. We all are living in an age of clay." Leodegrance had tried all his life to be optimistic, but it wasn't easy as he grew older. Every year, the time grew worse, even if the change was not apparent on his little estate. Sometimes he felt like a man trying to push back the tide with only the force of his own body. "When my sons are grown," he would repeat, "they will carry on. The barbarians will not conquer. They will not." Civilization was very dear to him, and to him he meant Rome. To him, that meant Rome. Not as she was today, perhaps not as she had ever been, save in the minds of a few idealists and dreamers, but Rome still, with all the best that she stood for: republican government, culture, philosophy, reason, indoor plumbing. Someone must make a stand to preserve it. With a sigh, Leodegrance moved his mind back to the problem at hand. The pipes were leaking. In the unremembered past, his forefathers had built the house near a natural hot spring, so that both baths and heated rooms were always possible. He blessed his pagan ancestors and wished the old centurion were there now to manage the estate. Perhaps he would have known how to stem the tide. The summer was steeped in early gold. The heat turned the earth to a into a dying ember rather, baking and smoothing all thoughts of cool air or winter chill. Even the mighty forest crackled as wanderers passed through. Guinevere longed to go there again, but was not allowed. Something seemed to be pulling her back to the place where she had first seen the silver light, but Leodegrance and Gwendolyn had been frightened enough by her adventure and were firm in their refusal. She had roamed on the edge, sometimes with Giraldus, sometimes with the maids, but never alone. She saw nothing, but once she thought she heard a call far away from someone who wanted her desperately. She went running madly into the woods, but was pulled back by her attendant. "I must go," she screamed. They carried her home and put her to bed, with mint tea and a guard at her door. Her mother rocked her like a baby. Her father told her stories of the saints. Flora recited arcane charms in Old Britannic. Nothing would calm her. Finally, they left her alone in her room. The moon shone whitely through the window, and a shadow too swift to shape ran past. Guinevere cried out and reached towards it. Then she slept. The next day she remembered nothing. To Gwendolyn, all these days were nothing but a blurry chaos of work and planning. Guinevere would be all right. These spells were only the result of her being too much alone or with Flora. Giraldus was good for her, saint or not. He was always calm and sensible. I haven't time to worry. Gwendolyn reminded herself. The child is almost 13. Lord knows the odd things we imagined then. Leodegrance will see to her. Flora is getting old, though, and I don't like the way she's been looking at Guinevere lately. She mustn't carry these pagan notions of hers too far. The girl is mine, not hers. Well, Merlin will be here soon. Dear friend, he can explain it all, but I mustn't act as if I think he's truly a seer. He must have some place he can go and not be greeted at arm's length. He's still my cousin. What a time of year for guests. I hope they'll be content with mutton. We'll tell them it's very late spring lamb. She bustled about, determined to keep her mind from the things she feared and longed for most. It was late in July. Guinevere and Giraldus were bathing their feet in the creek, only the woman with the black hair was along, and for a change no one was singing. Guinevere lay on the bank, her toes dangling happily in the muddy water, her cheek pressed against the earth. Do you hear something? She asked Giraldus lazily. Giraldus began to laugh uncontrollably. Do you know? He gasped. This is the first time in years someone has asked me that meant anything but those darned voices. Someone pinched him, and he batted the air to stop it. No, really, Guinevere insisted. I hear horses coming, galloping. Hurry. They are very near. Look. She screamed hysterically in his ear as the horses came around the bend and raced towards her, right through the stream. In a moment, Guinevere was lifted, jerked up into the arms of her brother Mark. They were home. So that's who Merlin's guests were. Home again. She clung to Mark, weeping for joy. Through her tears, she saw Giraldus's beaming face. He knew all along, she thought. Someone should have told Mother. Well, we made it to page 56. And I believe that we'll stop. This is a good place to stop because we made it to chapter 3. Cool. So, let me get a bookmark here. And we're going to put that in here. Okay. We have been reading from Guinevere. And it is a book by Sharan Newman. I will reiterate that this book is still for sale at most of the big bookstores. In all the big stores. Along with the sequel, which is the Chessboard Queen, and the final book in the trilogy, Guinevere Evermore. And so you should check that out. Anyways, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.